everyone. I hope everyone had a chance to grab some water, grab some coffee before we dive right into bylaws. We will give you a bit of a break to stretch your legs afterwards. Or feel free to stand up and do some Taiso. Camera on or off, your choice. All right, we'll give just a second for our last few people to transition over from our prior room, and then we'll get started. Let me share my screen. So while we're waiting for everybody to settle in, these are kind of who I'm expecting to be our voting delegate today. I believe most of you have received your URL and let me know that you received it. A few of you have not. So if you haven't, Melissa Golden is going to be helping to get those URLs out to you. So send her a private message and she'll make sure that you get that URL. And if you did receive your URL, have that pulled up on the side, and we're going to go over how the voting is going to work today. All right. Let's see. Just want to make sure we give everybody a chance to get in, and then we will get rolling. Thank you so much, Anna, for the bylaws link. The voting link is only available to the delegates. So if you're not a designated delegate indicated on this chart, then there's no need to go to the voting link. We'll want to just keep it, it is one vote per chapter per article. So that will, thank you so much, Anna. It'll help keep the confusion down. Perfect. Anna, thank you so much. All right. Well, let's go ahead and get started. I know there's probably a few people to still come in from grabbing coffee, water, stretching their legs between that last session. But we'll go ahead and start getting a little bit of the history and the context to this bylaws project out of the way. And then we're going to spend the bulk of the time going through and voting for our bylaw changes. So for those of you who haven't had the opportunity to attend one of our quarterly forums over the last 6 months or so, we did start our bylaw project about almost close to 6 months ago at this point. So we start off always with our CR philosophy for this year of collaboration, transparency, and sustainability. So we wanted to make sure that we had a very collaborative process. So we utilized a working group that was open to anybody in the JETAA ecosystem and community that was interested in participating and having their voice heard on the bylaws. And we wanted to be very transparent. So we did introduce the project at a quarterly forum back in June, I believe, and then brought an update to our August quarterly forum for progress, as well as having a Q&A session and an open comment session where we shared the link to the bylaws draft to the entire community via social media, as well as newsletter and that quarterly forum with a feedback form. So we've really tried to get out there and get your comments and questions and concerns on the bylaw rewrite. The goal, of course, being the sustainability of our organization. Our bylaws have served us well, but they're about 10 years old. They were ratified in 2012. If you were here yesterday for Matt's amazing history session, you're familiar with that. So they've served us well for 12 years, but over 10 years, over the course of 10 years, we've just grown and changed as an organization, and our bylaws need to grow with us and be able to grow also for another 10 years into the future. So here's an overview of what I was describing a moment ago about our methodology, about how we've tried to keep this very transparent and open to the community. If you guys have any questions, we do have a little bit of time today, but because we have spent a good deal of time trying to get commentary and feedback from the community, today we feel like we are comfortably ready to vote. I do want to give a shout out and some transparency to who is participating on our bylaws working group. You can see the list on the left, and on the right hand side, I just wanted to point out that we had people come out from all areas and eras of our community. So we had former and current chapter leaders, former current country reps, members of the board of advisors, members from CLARE, US JETAA, and former JET coordinators that all participated in this. They brought all kinds of different day job skills and expertise, and we had people from large and small chapters. I was also really excited to see a mix of JETs that were on JET in the 90s, the 2000s, and I don't know, I guess we say that as the 10s. So we were represented across a number of years and experiences with the JET Alumni Association as well. So I'm going to hand this over to Melissa Golden, who has really served as our bylaws guide and guru throughout this project, to give a little bit of her background and an education on what are bylaws.
All right, thanks, Megan. So hi, everyone. I'm Melissa. I'm from the JETAA NC, Northern California, Nevada chapter. And I have gone through the process of updating bylaws for our chapter. I also work at a nonprofit, and so my kind of approach or entry into this comes with that perspective as well. And JETAA NC is also a nonprofit, so there's some elements, of course, of that aren't necessary for JETAA USA, but it's just helpful to kind of keep in mind as we were considering what components to add and kind of the level of specificity that we wanted to go to with this update. So to just kind of take a step back, I think it's important to think about what bylaws are and are not, and then also kind of what characteristics we're looking for in these bylaws. Bylaws it's really helpful for me to think about them more as like a code, a programming code or language, where they really aren't a blueprint where you're going to create a very rigid structure and, you know, when all is said and done, the structure that you have should look exactly like what's on the blueprint. It's more a set of instructions that tell you, in this circumstance, this is what happens. So it's a bit of a logic model, essentially, for how the organization should be structured and how it should be governed. And with that, it defines your authorities, who's involved in the leadership, what powers they have, what responsibilities they have, and also what limitations there are. And this really helps guide the decisions and actions of leadership, but not doesn't prescribe them, and also ensures accountability. Bylaws are not a place to put operational policies and procedures, and I think some chapters, certainly our chapter, had some of that language in there as well. And the reason that you might want to take these out or kind of consider a different way to present them is because these need to be a bit more adaptable and adaptable to the current situation. And they might be things that you'll add and adjust as you go. So really, they're a little bit more dynamic than what your bylaws would need to be, but you want to have a provision in or kind of mechanisms within your bylaws to empower people to make those types of policies and procedures. It also is not a strategic plan where you're that would be something that's maybe a little bit more short term. The other thing to keep in mind is that they are not changed frequently, but they're not never changed. It's good to update them every once in a while. So as we think about what types of qualities we want to see in our bylaws, we want them to be relevant, that they're not just something that you throw on a shelf and never look at again. They need to enable effective governance, empower your leadership to be able to manage the organization effectively. And they need to really be reflective of what the organization is, its culture, and its constituency. They should not be they can be specific and literal, and sometimes to a almost strange degree, very literal, but not overly prescriptive. And I like the term specifically vague. If it doesn't need to be defined and restricted, then it's better to not do that so that you don't paint yourself into a corner. And along with that, staying within the boundaries of the organization. As we saw earlier, JETAA USA is one of many national chapters as part of JETAA International. So there are other organizations there, MOFA, that have an influence on the structure and the operations of this organization. But really, when you're thinking about your bylaws, you want to almost define it as if it's its own entity, because it is, and it needs to be able to operate as such. but with consideration for how it works with these other organizations. So there might be, you might notice that some things have been taken out, but that the structure is still consistent with kind of keeping in mind who we work with, essentially. And then kind of bringing in the nonprofit perspective, aligning with best practices for consistent language and construction. And this is just briefly kind of recapping what you might see in a bylaw versus what could be defined elsewhere. So, for example, your purpose is always going to stay the same, but your mission statement might change over time. That's also usually a pretty big discussion for organizations. You might have certain elements around criteria for kind of minimum criteria for holding office, but then you don't necessarily want to include an entire job description in your bylaws, but you do need that mechanism for creating a position. Similarly, you have mechanisms for what needs to be voted on and what kind of the minimum requirements are for those, or for handling resignations and removals, but the actual procedure can be outlined a bit more specifically elsewhere. We can go to the next one. And then just briefly to take a look at, I think this might look familiar for everybody in terms of their how their chapters kind of structured. You may or may not have a board of advisors, but there's usually some sort of leadership component, and there's kind of an oversight component. With small chapters, you know, there might only be a few people involved in this picture, but I think it's helpful to kind of see JETAA International's example of kind of the three main components of governance. And then if we go to the next one, we tried to kind of reflect that to be a bit more transparent and structured and consistent in terms of defining the different leadership components of JETAA USA. And I think we're very familiar with the leadership positions of the country representatives. They really do represent the organization, but there also is a role for the chapters. And so something that we've tried to do here is define that a little bit more clearly in terms of especially their oversight capabilities. And then also you met yesterday the board of advisors, and they play a very critical role in the success of the organization as well. So we want to make sure that all of these parts are defined and their responsibilities and limitations are also clearly defined.
Very good. Thanks, Melissa. So let's talk a little bit about our voting procedure. We are going to be voting today on 10 items. In my original messages, we were going to also vote on Article 18. We have removed that for today. We just realized that it was really tied to another article that we won't be voting on until later. So we went ahead and just tucked it away for another day. So we will be voting on Article 1 through 9, and then also 17. We kind of group these as structural bylaws that describe our organizational and leadership structure, whereas the ones left over, we're going to vote on at our next quarterly forum, which just, you know, save the date on the calendar, will be a January, February timeframe. And will be mandatory for at least one delegate from each chapter so that we can, again, vote on those roles. Those are going to be the procedural bylaws that kind of explain how we do the things that we do, like having national conferences or voting on country representatives. So for today, we get to talk a lot about our organizational structure. We are going to try to keep the discussion time a little bit short. We're working on a short time frame, and because we did have such a long comment period leading up to voting, our goal for today is to say, I'll come back to that in one moment. We're going to outline the major changes to each article and then allow a brief period for any questions that you need in order to clarify your understanding before you make a vote. And I like to refer to this as speak now or forever hold your peace level questions. Like any type of questions or discussion points that you have, we absolutely do want to hear any concerns that you have. But think about it as if you were interrupting a wedding. Since we have had a comment period, the level of questions that we're looking for are generally going to be very serious in nature. Not necessarily like, oh, I don't really like the way this is phrased. Can we please write it a different way? So those types of comments and feedback have passed, but we are absolutely want you to speak up if there's anything that you feel is an absolute showstopper. We will open voting and have a brief voting period per article in case anybody has any questions, and then our delegates will vote on their form. Any delegates out there have not received their form, please let me know. I'm gonna faux pas and just go back to the very beginning of this presentation here as a reminder of who our voting delegates are. Whoops, one more back. So voting delegates, if you have not received the URL to the form, please send a message to Melissa Golden in the chat and she will get you that URL. Okay, so let's pop back down. I have a question in the chat. Music City is not represented today. So that is correct. We do have representatives from the other 18 chapters. Unfortunately, Music City was not able to field a delegate today. That's an excellent question. That goes along with our quorum and voting rules that we'll be talking about in the next quarterly forum. Rebecca, either email is fine. This is a great question. So for my voting delegates, we are asking your name, email, and what chapter you're representing. That is primarily just so we can make sure that we don't accidentally get any double votes from the same chapter. So we are just going to verify once all of the items have been submitted to make sure that we don't have any duplicates from the same chapter. So any information that you put in there, as long as your chapter is correct, we're a happy camper. Okay, very good. Excellent questions. Let me pop back to, I want to point out, since we are splitting voting into two pieces, we're going to have provisional voting today. And then at the quarterly forum, we're going to have final voting. And what that means is anything that we vote on to approve today, as long as there are no changes made to that materially change anything about that article, then it's considered approved, final approval, and we're done. But because we do still have some items that we are working on, it's possible that one of those things may impact something that we've already voted on. If that does happen, you will have the opportunity to review those changes and vote again. That also means if there's anything that is not approved today, that the chapters decide that they do not support that activity or that article, then that will be brought back to our bylaws working group. We'll rediscuss, rework it, and we will bring it forward at the quarterly forum again in the future. All of the bylaws, once fully approved from today and the quarterly forum, will become effective on April 1st of 2023 with the beginning of the new fiscal year. Okay, are there any questions on voting? We are about to roll into our review of the articles and our voting.
Just want to call out that we're still missing delegates from Southeast and Florida. If you're here and your name just doesn't reflect your chapter or the delegate that's designated.
Florida is here as Mike, Melissa.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So if you are, Melissa, were you able to get Mike? Okay.
I don't see one in the,
right,
so yeah, if your name's
here,
different, please rename yourself.
If you're here representing Florida or Southeast, please send a message to Melissa so we can get that voting link to you. And while we are wrapping that up, I do want to pop back to our schedule. Sorry, we have our, so we are going to try to keep our discussion time brief. Some of these are going to be really short and we can just run through them, I hope. Some of these items we have a little bit more discussion time planned. So just prepare yourself to keep any questions and comments as brief as possible, but do get the information that you need in order to feel that you are confident to place your vote. So while we are waiting for our last voters to come along, I want to do a quick overview of the types of changes that were made to the bylaws. We did do more a rewrite. So we have some net new provisions in there, which are things that were not in our original bylaws that we felt that we needed to add in order to support our organization as it's grown and changed. There are things that were in the bylaws that we've made some significant changes to. Generally, it was to improve clarity, address issues, or bolster our structure, which was maybe a little bit loose and ill-defined. We've also removed a few things. So Melissa had alluded earlier, we used to have a lot in our bylaws that was very rigidly tied to, for example, GIA rules. The question then becomes, well, what happens if Claire decides to support us with GIA any longer? We are then in non-compliance with our bylaws. So some of those items have been removed from the bylaws so that if something were to happen to our GIA, or if something were to happen to JETAA AI, that we would not be in non-compliance with our own bylaws because those organizations were no longer supporting us in that particular manner. So those are generally the types of major changes. Minor changes to content are generally just related to clarity or structure issues. So trying to take the information there and just present it in a clearer way than it was previously. And then there's just simple grammar and formatting. There are some things that were not changed at all. Maybe we copied and pasted exactly as it was from the old bylaws to the new ones, or maybe moved it somewhere else, but exactly the way it was prior. Okay, Melissa, are we ready to roll?
Yep, I think so.
All right, very good. So let's dive in. Article 1 is basically a net new provisions and minor changes to content. So we moved some of the provisions that used to be in Article 1 to other articles in the bylaws where they fit more appropriately. There was no change to our name or our purpose as an organization other than some light clarification. You'll notice in the purpose section that clarification was really just expanding the definition of who we work with as an organization, because we have more organizations that we work with now than existed 10 years ago. And presumably we may have additional organizations in the future that will come into existence. So that is what that clarification was. We also added sections on political activities and prohibited activities to acknowledge that we are not a political organization and that we can't do anything for profit or anything that goes against our purpose as an organization. So I want to open it up. Are there any questions? Please do use the raise hand feature if you have any questions or any major concerns about this provision before we enter voting. I'm just making my screen as big as possible so I can get a sense of who's out there. All right. Well, if we don't have any questions or concerns, then go ahead, delegates, voting delegates, and cast your vote for Article 1. I'll give you just a couple of seconds in there. I'm also going to note for the general community, if the vote options are to approve the article, to not approve the article, or to abstain from the article. And we have asked that if your voting delegate is choosing to not approve or abstain, just to give us a little bit of information why, so that the bylaws working group can review that information and use that if we need to make changes to that article. None of it will be punitive. It's all just feedback to help us improve or be aware of any concerns in the community. All right, let's roll into Article 2. This article is dedication of assets, and it is completely new. It was not in the prior bylaws. The purpose is to establish expectations regarding how our assets as an organization can be used and cannot be used, and what happens to those assets if we're ever dissolved. Now, JETAA USA in and of itself, we do not have a bank account. There is no massive pile of money in the bank account. We receive GIA just like the rest of you, but we do have stuff like swag or other items that we are responsible for. So this ensures that we are returning money to those who have given it to us, for example, Claire funds, or finding an appropriate usage for leftover swag, banners, and those types of things. Are there any questions or concerns regarding dedication of assets? Very good. Delegates, please feel free to go and cast your vote for Article 2. We'll give just a second for that. All right. Rolling into Article 3, we start to get into a little bit of a high-level overview of our organizational structure. Now, we do have major changes to the content in this section. However, a lot of it was just moved to other articles. That was to provide clarity and avoid a little bit of duplication that was happening in the previous bylaws. We also here are introducing the chapter council, which is a new concept that is fully outlined in Article 7. So this is just a mention of the existence of the chapter council as one of the elements of our structure. All right, I think that is the summary of that. Does anybody have any questions or concerns about the organizational structure? Very good. Go ahead and vote, delegates. And thank you earlier. I saw that Anna had dropped in the chat the link to the bylaws. So if anybody is curious or has not had the opportunity, feel free to take a look at those. All right, Article 4 is about JET alumni membership. We did make major changes to this content, again, moving some provisions to a more appropriate location in the bylaws. We also did some clarification of individual versus chapter membership in JETAA USA. The section in the original bylaws was really a mix of how chapters were members of JETAA USA, also how individuals were members of JETAA, and also how individuals were members of their own chapter. So we wanted to affirm and remove language that was seeming to control how chapters manage their own membership. Chapters are responsible for determining their own membership. JETAA USA does not make that determination. So we removed that to clarify that chapters are allowed to determine their own membership. We also wanted to focus on individual membership in chapters, subchapters, and JETAA USA, making sure that we are not duplicating those people across these areas. And some provisions were removed, or rather moved to an appropriate article to increase clarity. Lindsay, please.
JETAA Portland is not a 501c3. We do not have any kind of membership dues. And so for our situation, our mailing list is our membership list. It clarifies in here that a chapter should not have members part of multiple chapters. We have no filtration system to identify people who are part of another chapter. Coming into compliance with this would involve a major overhaul, pretty much killing our current mailing list and starting from scratch, especially if people on our mailing list have been there for a decade or so. What would you advise that we do in this case?
Excellent question. Melissa, take it away.
Yeah, this actually has no implication for you having to manage that. This is on the individual to decide which chapter they're affiliated with. So all it's really saying is that JETAA USA recognizes membership through chapter affiliation, and that how chapters manage their membership is up to them. Our recommendation is that they are not members of more than one chapter at a time, but there is no requirement being imposed here that the chapters are responsible for managing that.
Yes, does that help, Lindsay? So no one would need to overhaul their membership list. I know Mid-South is in the same shape as well. I think from a practicality standpoint, and I know that we don't want to rely on GIA too much, but I think since that is external to us, but I think it's a really easy example to use. GIA can only be used to support people that are within your chapter. So although I have a number of people on my chapter that are in Chicago, for example, that person cannot be an officer in my chapter because they don't live in my region. They cannot utilize GIA funds for their purposes because they're not in my region, and GIA funds are for people within my region. So that person can stay on our mailing list and can get our information, but when it comes to official functions, that person is not technically a member of my chapter. I don't know whether that helps or not, but that helps me kind of make sense of that distinction. Lindsay, I want to give you a chance to respond and then call on Daniel.
I just want to make the note that, so you're saying that in terms of GIA, we can use GIA funds to perform whatever, projects or activities that we're going to do, even if the participants may or may not be within our represented region.
Yes, that's correct, Lindsay. It's
Okay.
the distinction between maybe somebody from Chicago comes in to visit New Orleans and decides that they want to put on an event. We should not be giving them Mid-South funds necessarily. Now, this is getting into a GIA discussion, which is not covered in the bylaws. So we can pull this offline and clarify the GIA piece. I just wanted to try to use that example to specify, like, we communicate with all types of people from all over the US who may be interested, or outside of the US, who may be interested in us as a chapter. But in terms of chapter membership, it's really once we start getting down to them doing official things on a chapter's behalf, that's where they need to be a member of only one chapter. Like, I can't serve as a leader in both the Mid-South chapter and the Chicago chapter. I need to reside in the region in which I'm serving, is maybe a simpler example of that.
That suits my needs. I understand the GIA is a part of this, but also kind of not. And thank you very much for your clarification.
Excellent question, Lindsay. Really appreciate it. Daniel, please.
Hi, yeah, I had a question about section 4.3, revocation of membership. It mentions at the end that any JET alum whose membership is revoked by their chapter is no longer recognized as a member of JETAA USA. And I was wondering what member of JETAA USA means in that sense, because in section 4.1, it mentions that all former JET participants in principle are members. So if someone is revoked from an individual chapter, does that make them ineligible for certain things, or for like everything pertaining to the JETAA USA organization?
Very good. Melissa, take it away.
Yeah, so again, that in principle part is really the kind of qualifier there, where theoretically, essentially is what that's saying, everybody's a member, but your membership is only officially recognized through membership with your chapter. So if your chapter revokes your membership is essentially revoked from JETAA USA.
And I think there's a provision in there as well that talks about like the full benefits of membership. So if you think about what that is, all of the 40,000 JET alum are technically members of our organization, but if they haven't signed up with a chapter, they're not receiving notices that events are happening. They're not benefiting from the use of GIA to support things that they might want to do, for example. So not being a member of a chapter means that they are not receiving the full benefits of the community and the events that you guys are putting on, as well as rolling up, of course, into JETAA USA, is a little bit of an umbrella organization. So they may not be receiving the full benefits of being able to attend NatCon because they are not a member of a chapter and not eligible, for example, in the old days where it wasn't fully open. I hope that helps a little bit as well. Daniel, opening it up to comments.
Yeah, I'm thinking in terms of the example, if someone's membership is revoked from, say, our chapter, does this document make it that they are unable to join another chapter in the future?
That is more of a process or procedural question where we would want to maybe outline what is the process of notifying when a member of a chapter, their membership has been revoked from their chapter, and then notifying or making other chapters aware of that fact. So that's more of a process question that we haven't got to yet, and is not necessarily something that we would outline in the bylaws. But I think that's a really good point and a good next step.
Okay, cool.
And thank you so much for your question, Daniel. This is really excellent. One thing that I've learned about bylaws while working on all of this as well is this is somewhat of a contingency plan item. You hope that you never need it, but if someone does behave in a manner that is extremely damaging to the organization, we want to have some type of provision that allows us to take care of that situation. So our hope would be that we never need to revoke membership. But an example that was discussed as we were writing the bylaws was, for example, if someone behaved in such a manner that it caused an incident that Claire caught wind of, and Claire indicated that they would not support our organization any longer if we allowed this person to be a member. That revocation of membership clause is in there so that we could say officially that we have revoked their membership and that they do not represent us, that type of thing, right? It would be very extreme, and we would hope that it would not happen and we would not need it. But to Melissa's point, if it is needed, we would have more procedural things, both at the chapter level, and the chapter would be allowed to make the decision as to what that means for your chapter. And then we would also determine notification. Is it that that person has done something to the point where it needs to be notified up to the national level, or is it just that they're no longer welcome in your chapter any longer? And that's where we'll continue to build upon this with some procedural documents in the future. This is an excellent, two excellent questions. All right, is there anything else before we move on to the voting for our chapter alumni membership? All right, very good. So go ahead and cast your vote, delegates, if you have not done so already. And thank you so much for your questions. All right, looking at Article 5 about chapters. So there are some net new provisions and some major changes to the content in here. The new additions are all listed below. What we were trying to do is really get an idea of how to define some chapters that are active versus dormant versus dissolution. And having a chapter that is somewhat in dormancy right now, just establishing that it's okay to know that not all chapters will be active at all times. This is also an important distinction. So I think part of it is just philosophical, letting our organization know that we understand and acknowledge that there may be periods of dormancy for our chapters. And then there will be some impact on the procedural items that we're going to discuss at the next section with regards to what dormancy means for voting. So if a chapter were dormant, of course, they would not be included in voting because they are not active. So that will take some impact on our procedural bylaws in the future. It's also going to provide some guidance to revoking chapter registration. This gets back to the same question that Daniel was just asking. So we can revoke individual membership. We can also revoke chapter registration in the case that there were some type of gross breach of faith with the organization. So bring that Claire example up again. A chapter does something that Claire is upset with and they indicate that we can no longer continue. We seriously hope that that would never be an issue and would do whatever possible to avoid that. But we do want to ensure that there is some contingency in existence should the absolutely unbelievable, unthinkable happen. So like the emergency eject button, essentially, of the bylaws. We also indicated in here the implications of a change in the number of registered chapters. So we do indicate that dissolution of a chapter is possible, but reaffirm that we will do everything in our power, both ourselves, our supporting organizations, and the ecosystem will do whatever in our power to avoid that. And we outline the implications of what that might mean for our organization if a chapter were to dissolve, to discourage and encourage people to use that as a true last resort if they can't continue. So let me open up the floor to any questions or concerns on Article 5. I have to say, I'm really impressed with how deeply you guys read the bylaws too. All right. Oh, Daniel, please go ahead.
Sorry, I just have a clarifying question on 5.2.1, chapter requirements for active status.
Yes.
Point 1, maintain all requirements for chapter registration. I just kind of confused about the language for this one. Does that mean that these things need to be submitted yearly? Or that it just needs to have happened once and documentation of it having happened once exists?
Yeah, Melissa, I see you shaking your head yes there.
Yeah, I think yes, you except for like the annual report. What did we call it? The chapter update. right? The other elements are really, are these things that were required in order to become a registered chapter still in place? So if they were to no longer be in place, that you're not meeting those requirements, then that would be a discussion. But again, that's also a little bit more of a procedural question of like how that would be checked and at what point, would the CRs confirm that. But yes, except for anything that's explicitly requested on an annual basis or time bound in a time bound manner, the other ones would just be, as long as they're still, if that's still the case, then you're still an active chapter.
And I also want to throw out as well, one of the hallmarks of what we attempted to do with the bylaws is to get our bylaws in compliance with how bylaws generally are. But bylaws can be a little bit more restrictive than we are as an organization. So I just want to comment on like the annual reporting requirement. That doesn't necessarily mean that we need a 13-page annual report and it must be submitted by such and such date and like very formal, right? We are still the organization that we are. So that may mean having a chapter check-in with your CRs, and that is considered your annual report. That may mean that you, I think for us, it's that you go and you update your chapter information and let us know who your new officers are when you change officers, right? So don't take that as, I think sometimes it can get a little bit scary because it sounds like it's really harsh. But at the end of the day, we are still the same organization and we're not looking to change anything significantly about the way that we're currently operating. Excellent. Daniel, is that a satisfactory answer for you?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for your question. Are there any other questions before we move to voting? All right, go ahead and cast your votes. Moving into Article 6, JETAA USA leadership positions. We also have some net new provisions and some major changes here. We wanted to aggregate provisions defining the number, qualifications, responsibilities, limitations, appointments, terms, vacancies, removal, and resignation of CRs. They were kind of scattered all over the prior bylaws. So we just pulled them all into one location and removed any duplication or clarified any areas where there were some discrepancies of that information. We added a provision allowing for the creation of some additional provisions and delegations of responsibilities to assist in conducting JETAA USA business. So the example for this is that the CRs could really use a webmaster, right? Updating the website and like learning how to use all of the new tech, it just takes a lot of time. It's not something that we're necessarily good at. So when we say delegating to additional positions or delegating responsibilities, we have in mind a webmaster as a great example of that. So that person would not be a CR, would not be able to make decisions regarding anything. They are not an elected official, but they're just helping us keep our tech on track, right? So there is a good example for you guys to understand what's behind that provision. And we also added some provisions, and we've kind of done this throughout all of our leadership roles, addressing compensation, the fact that we are not entitled to any, and the non-liability of JETAA leadership. So if something went wrong and we got sued, we as the individuals working within the organization are not liable for that. So we wanted to basically clean up the information, aggregate it in one spot, and empower CRs to get a little bit of help if there's something that we need help to do in order to keep things moving quickly and streamlined at the top. Are there any questions or concerns about Article 6? Very good. All right, then go ahead and cast your votes. And while you guys are casting, can someone give me an idea of a time check? We're about halfway through our articles, so that's perfect. You can either drop it in the chat or unmute. And there we go, Adam.
There's about 20 more minutes or 25 if we adjust for going over in the last session. So you have 20 to 25 minutes left.
All right, we're doing awesome, guys. Thanks so much, Adam. Daniel, please go ahead.
Sorry, I just had a process question from one of my members who's here as well about provisions or changes that will be voted on now, as well as at the next quarterly. Could you go over that one more time, please?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be happy to. So these provisions that we're voting on right now, they are going to be considered approved for the purposes of enacting on April 1st, unless something were to change with them between now and then. So we still have half of the articles that we are still actively making changes to in order to modernize them. So if changing something in those additional articles were to cause something to change materially in the ones that we have already voted on, we of course would want to allow you the opportunity to view those changes again and revote. When I say something changing materially, anything that changes the meaning of something. So if we just update like a grammar or a spelling error, then we of course are not going to bring that forward to you again. But if it were to, we would need to modify a provision in a way where it's essentially different than it was before, we would bring that forward for another review and another vote for the community. Anything that is not approved today, if it does not pass today, we will also rework that in the bylaws working group and bring that forward at the quarterly forum as well. Once all of the provisions have been voted on today and at the quarterly forum, the items that are approved through both of those will take effect April 1st. Anything that is not approved, that does not pass, will not be effective April 1st. It will go back to the working group for additional work, and we will determine when the next voting will happen for that. All right. Does that work for you,
Cool, thank
Daniel?
you.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, let's roll into Article 7, the chapter council. So this includes net new provisions and major changes to content. We are essentially codifying the powers, responsibilities, and expectations of chapters as participants in the governance of JETAA USA. So I want to say that this is not really, all of these powers, responsibilities, and expectations already exist in the existing bylaws. We're just clarifying and codifying them. So we're pulling them from all over the previous bylaws, putting them in one place. And we've named it the Chapter Council to make it obvious and to empower you guys to realize that you are active participants in the decisions of what are going on in JETAA USA beyond just voting for your country reps. So this is going to provide for defining the number, qualifications, responsibilities, limitations, all of that stuff listed on that bottom left bullet point for the chapter rep. Basically, what our chapter council is what we're doing right now. One delegate from each chapter is going to be empowered to be the liaison between your chapter and the country reps. So what that means functionally is that you're going to be called upon to vote. Now you're thinking, oh no, I'm the delegate. What happens if I'm on vacation? You can delegate to somebody else in your chapter. It's just your responsibility to make sure that someone from the chapter engages at the national level. So don't be worried that once you're the chapter delegate rep for the CRs that you have no flexibility there. And the other things that you would be engaging in are quarterly forums. So the chapter council delegate or representative would be responsible for making sure that you are attending quarterly forums and bringing that information back to your chapter. You may choose to participate in working groups or committees that are interesting to you, or just ensure that your chapter is aware that those things are happening so that they can choose to participate in them if they would like to. So I think this one can sound a little bit scary because it seems like we're giving you a new job that you didn't have before, but we're really just trying to raise awareness of the fact that this is something that has already existed, but maybe just wasn't very well known previously, and giving it an official name to acknowledge the fact that you are actually actors that can influence what is going on in the JETAA USA national level. Let me make sure I got all of our purposes in here. Empower, clarifying accountability. Oh, the last piece that I want to bring out is clarifying that we as country reps, so myself, Adam, and Valerie, we're accountable to you. So if the chapters see something that they are in support of or something that they're concerned of, it is the responsibility and the prerogative of the chapters to speak up and let us know that you have concerns about what is going on with the country representatives as well. So that is the way that it has always been. We really wanted to just add further emphasis to that to make sure that the chapters were aware that you have the power to speak up if you have any concerns about what's going on in JETAA USA. So let me open the floor to any questions or comments. All right, I'll go ahead and I actually forgot I had this slide. The case for the chapter council. One thing that I did want to bring out on this is that this does involve the quarterly forums. So we are looking to make the quarterly forums more of a mandatory thing for one representative from the chapters. And this is really in response to the fact, if you're an old timer for JETAA like me, every time we have a NatCon, we have the calls for, we need to do this more than once per year. That's what the quarterly forums are. It's adding 3 additional instances that are much shorter. They're generally an hour to an hour and a half. Where we can get together and we can talk about problems, get energy from one another, and work towards shared goals as well. So I did just want to call that out. Ask and you shall receive. We now have a way that we can communicate more than once per year at NatCon, and that ties into that chapter council to ensure that there's somebody there who's keeping track of those and can attend and bring the voice of the chapter to those, as well as bring that knowledge back to your chapter as well. All right, so voting is open on this, and we will roll into Article 8, Board of Advisors. So we do have some major changes to our content in here. Again, we were doing a lot of aggregating, pulling provisions about the BOA from all over the prior bylaws and conglomerating them into one place. We also provide recommendations for the growth and composition of the board membership, regular reviews of board membership, and suggestions for the duration of board membership. We wanted to improve the transparency and accountability within our organization, so making it clearer who is on the board, how they can how they become to be on the board, and that such things as that, and ensuring that the board has the best composition of members to support the needs of the organization. We also wanted to reaffirm the board's role in maintaining our institutional memory and continuity of the organization. So the CRs turn over, but our board is going to be there to help the new CRs and to give them the context that they need. We wanted to provide a pathway to retaining the knowledge and expertise of our veteran JETAA supporters. I don't know, just as a great example, I don't know how many of you know Monica Yuki. We all cried at the 2019 NatCon when she ran out of terms as a CR. To lose her knowledge and expertise would have been devastating for our organization. With her years of experience, right? So we wanted to make sure that there's a pathway to retain those people that have this amazing energy and Genki for JET, as well as that knowledge and experience to help the organization. So I will open the floor to any questions or comments. All right, go ahead and vote. And we will roll into 9. 2 left, guys. All right, let's talk about committees. This is a net new addition. We did not have any provisions for committees previously. We wanted to officially create a mechanism to form committees and working groups to support the needs and initiatives of the organization. This is basically formalizing something that's already happening. Please give a shout out and a thank you to our amazing NatCon working group. And today, this bylaws session has been made possible by the amazing bylaws working group. So shout out to them as well for all of their time and their feedback and logistics as well. So we are already doing this. We just didn't have a mechanism in the bylaws to tell us that it was okay to do this. And that's really somewhat about making sure that we have some limitations, controls, these items indicating that people on working groups and committees are not permitted to be compensated and that they're not liable for any issues. So there's some like legal concerns in there as well. but also letting our organization know that it's okay for us to use these things. Sometimes if it's not in the bylaws, we don't think about it as a thing that we're allowed to do. So it throws it out there for future generations that working groups are an A-OK thing that we can use in order to further the needs of our organization. So we are empowering the chapter council and country representatives to form committees and working groups as we need to in order to continue the work of our organization. It's creating a sustainable method where we can pursue long-term and large projects, even if the CRs transition out in the middle of them. And we can invite a variety of voices and levels of experience to participate in our community. Are there any questions or concerns about committees? Please go ahead.
Hi, this is Neve from JETAA DC. I have a general question for the definition of the term compensation. So I know that some of our grants do give funding to different board members for the work that they do. Is that called compensation or is that something else?
Melissa, I'll leave that in your court.
By grant, do you mean like an honorarium or something like that?
Yeah, so for example, for our mentorship program, the people running it do receive a small fund to support the extra time that they give to that mentorship program. And that was built into the grant when I started running this organization, and it's seen as a norm. Is that considered compensation then, or is that not considered compensation? Because I've seen that a lot in the last articles, in particular 7, 8, and 9. So I just want to make sure I understand that definition.
Yeah, it is kind of one of those specifically vague things. But yes, compensation would be any form of monetary or even like in-kind compensation for services. In these provisions, it basically says that they're not allowed to be compensated unless it's a reimbursement or an advancement because they're going to incur some kind of expense in participating in that activity. But it also does provide that, it says, I'm just trying to find the specific piece here, in reasonable amounts as approved by the country representatives or the council in this case. So if it's approved, if it's, you know, we're giving someone an honorarium for doing this event, that's okay as long as it's been approved, is essentially what it's saying.
Okay,
Just that they
so
wouldn't
it's
receive
been
a regular
approved, then
salary.
it fits within the bylaws then.
Right, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Melissa, that last comment I think is really important, and it was the distinction that I understood as well. I think the compensation is referring to you don't receive a salary for doing what you're doing. So if you are serving as a committee chair, you're not receiving money just because you're the committee chair. But
Right.
if you receive an honorarium for performing a specific service, such as running an event or being a speaker for something, for example, then I believe that's treated differently. Is that correct, Melissa?
They all are, yes, and it depends. It's a difficult one to define. Usually an honorarium is a nominal amount of funds that are provided as recognition and gratitude. So they wouldn't be equivalent to what that person would earn necessarily for doing their job. So, and of course, usually honorariums, I think within JETAA are like $50 to $100. So that kind of, you know, aligns. But yeah, not something that's a regular payment for performing their role essentially, but could be kind of a one-off like gesture of gratitude. That's totally fine. And again, as long as it's approved, it's fine.
Sorry about that, Melissa.
No,
There's
okay.
also a comment in the chat asking about the difference between compensation and reimbursement. So reimbursement is what we're used to. I go out and I buy the cups and plates and forks for the event, and then I give my receipt and I get reimbursed for that. So basically spending one's own personal funds for the purpose of whatever event or item is happening, and then being reimbursed for those personal expenses that you had put out. It's also a really good question. I saw Ryan's hand up. Ryan, are you good, or did you want to ask your question?
Oh, no, I was just gonna ask and clarify especially for DC's behalf, but I think it was answered. But what if they're getting funding from a different organization? Like I believe they're getting funding also with Sasakawa. Does that make a difference if it's not GIA related?
This is a good question. Keep in mind the bylaws are not specifically referring to GIA. It would be including any income sources, whether Sasakawa, GIA, personal donations, that kind of thing. Melissa, I see your thinking face.
Yeah, I was responding to a question in the chat too about, and I think it kind of relates, like this is within the scope of JETAA. If there is a grant and within that grant, there is a provision or like there's a line item essentially for speaker fee or something like that, that's within that scope of the grant. So that is a little bit separate from funds coming from JETAA USA. And again, I think all of this is to say that JETAA USA doesn't actually handle money directly very often. So this is really a very limited scope in terms of who's handing who money.
Very good questions. Are there any other questions or concerns on committees? And the non-compensation as well. All right, go ahead and cast your votes. We have one article left and it's a super quick and easy one. So I think the hard part is passed. All right, Article 17, construction and definition. This is a new provision. It's really kind of just a best practice for bylaws. It's determining what happens if somebody feels that there's a discrepancy in the bylaws, and that puts it to the chapter council to discuss. So if somebody is really looking, for example, this compensation question maybe comes up and we're examining the bylaws, we determine that we missed something and there's a loophole, that would go to the chapter council for discussion and decision remediation on that issue. It's also defining the usage of particular terminology within the bylaws. I think some of it's pronoun related, et cetera. So just a general blanket provision to try and provide clarity to the bylaws. Are there any questions or concerns on Article 17, construction and definition? All right, cast your votes. I feel like we're actually pretty good on time. Did we manage to do this on time?
Just a pinch over the original, but nothing serious. We can just move sessions back for 5 minutes for the day.
Excellent. All right. Well, very good. I'm going to give, we will be showing the results. I'm going to need just a little bit of time to go through, double check, make sure we didn't get any double votes or anything crazy. But we will be sharing the votes before the end of the day today to let everyone know which articles passed with approval or were not approved, et cetera. So you can be on the edge of your seats until we get all of that calculated. First off, thank you guys so much. You clearly read the bylaws really thoroughly, and I speak on behalf of the bylaws working group when we thank you profusely for that. We tried to get as many eyes on it, make sure we weren't making any mistakes. Bylaws working group, number of times we thought we had everything all set out, and then somebody read it and they're like, oh, what about this situation? And had to go back to the drawing board. So your eyes really help. Your questions have been absolutely fantastic. Thank you guys so much. I'm going to stop talking because I'm sure everybody really wants a break. All right, so I've lost track of what's next. Valerie, Adam, help. Where are we heading from here?
Hello. So the next session is going to be the data of JETAA. So we did push it back 5 minutes, but